Hello everybody, good evening, dobrý večer, milí študenti a prípadní ďalší poslucháči nášho vysílacieho štúdia. Hello for our evening broadcasting of Reflections on Architecture 2021. The project is part of the Empathy in Art project, which is supported by Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway through the EEA Grant. I'm very happy that today we will have our dear guest from Norway. Unfortunately, he's only online and not with us like physically here at the Faculty of Architecture. But anyway, let me welcome very warmly architect Tormod Amundsen from the Biotope office. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
As I already put it in our introductory lecture, this is an amazing office you are part of, because as I read, your most important concern is to care about birds.
Yeah, sort of.
So I'm really very curious, what will you present to us today? And I mean, I will not talk much more, and I will give the floor to you, and you please start your presentation. We are very much looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to present both myself, my office, and some of the work we are doing. It's very much appreciated. I always kind of enjoy the opportunities to share well, the ideas of how we as an architecture company, like Biotope, my company, how we are working with architecture and nature. I think that's the, well, you mentioned birds. That's kind of how Biotope started, as a more or less a bird watching architecture company. Now we've diversified quite a lot. We're working with birds, kayak paddling, mountain climbing, skiing, hiking, and nature conservation, travel and tourism, within nature-based travel and tourism. And in many ways, we're an architectural office that specializes in nature-related projects, essentially. And that's what I'll be talking about today. I'll give you a brief overview of well, Biotope, what we've done for the past few years since we started in 2009, and essentially our story. So I'll try and time it within approximately 45 minutes. Feel free to let me know if I'm moving too fast or talking too fast, but I'll try and keep my pace okay. Hope that's good with you guys. So, I'm not sure if anyone of you guys, just sorry, excuse me 1 minute, I'll close the door next to me here. All right, apologies for that. I'm actually right now at this tourism business we are working with in North Norway. And I've just been giving another talk about ecotourism and travel from an architectural perspective. I'll be sharing a little bit of that with you guys as well. So the birds you're seeing in this image, they are king eiders. They are birds I've heard about since I was a very young kid. Well, I'm an architect now, obviously, but I was always into nature and bird watching. And I've been kind of going on hikes and being outside in nature ever since I was a small kid. And watching just a living nature has always been something that fascinated me. It was almost like, well, if you know a little bit about birds, you'll know that birds are essentially the evolutionary descendants from dinosaurs. So when I was a small kid, I would just sit in my room and read about Tyrannosaurus Rex and all these amazing dinosaurs. And then when I realized that birds are essentially dinosaurs. I was kind of visiting nature, and I really felt like I was living in a real life Jurassic Park situation, and I found that endlessly just fascinating, and fascinating and amusing and amazing. And well, a very long story, but I've always, as well as being into nature, I've always also been into drawing and art and music and designing, and I kind of I guess I always wanted to try and combine those interests, being interested in nature and also being interested in the creative side of things. And somehow I found that architecture could be my way of, well, being both interested in the creative disciplines as well as nature. So that's when you start to wonder, where do you want to live? Where do you want to spend at least parts of your life? And I've always been very fascinated by the far north, about the high Arctic areas and about tundra, about cold climates. And I decided when I was finished with architecture school that I was going to live in an Arctic place, a remote place where there was a lot of potential and a lot of, what would you say, unfinished business and a lot of opportunity. At least that's how I saw it. So I decided to move to this small place called Vardø. It's a very small fishing village in the far north of Norway. It's actually the furthest northeast as you can go in Norway. And that's where you have this kind of bird life. These are photos I've been taking as as photography is kind of my big interest as well. And some of these photos I'm showing you now have actually resulted in some quite big TV and film productions happening in Vardø, among them being BBC Nature Productions that visited Hornøya, where this particular image is taken. This is another one of the character species for the area. And I thought as architects, we try to, in many ways, find ways into whatever condition we're faced with, and we try to read those conditions through something and then react to it. And I guess my way into reading things has actually just been wildlife and living nature, and in this case, birds. So this is where I moved to. I'm actually from central Norway, in Trondheim. That's middle of Norway, basically. And I decided I'm going to live in Vardø. That's in the center of this, where the longitude and latitudes meet. That's Vardø. It's 70 degrees north. It's 31 degrees east. It's further east than Istanbul. And it is as far north as Point Barrow in Alaska. It's a small fishing village. There's about 2,000 people living in this village. And it's snow-covered almost half of the year. It's windy all of the year. And it's one of these places that have been facing quite brutal conditions. It's a rural community, 2,000 people, where a lot of people have moved away. I mean, in Norway, as well as in other countries around the world, you will have the condition of people moving away from the rural areas, moving towards urbanization and centralization, essentially. As an architect, I remember as a newly educated architect in 2008, I was basically advised, like, going to Vardø, that's the dumbest thing you can possibly do. That should be the last choice. Actually, in 2009, the year I moved to Vardø, Vardø was ranked as the worst community in Norway in terms of commerce and business and opportunity. And perhaps that's not so weird, because Vardø today, it's a society of 1,800 people living on this island, but it's a town that used to be a flourishing fishing community with more than 4,000 people living there regularly, and also something like 4,000 seasonal workers. So the town that you see in this image is essentially it's essentially a town of just apologies for a second, I'll have to put up a camera. It just kept falling down. So the sound, the town that you see in this image is actually a town that used to have something like 8,000 people living there regularly, and now it's a place of 1,800 people. So you can only imagine how severe the impact of the decline has been for this community. Something like, I would say something like 20% or so of the houses in this community are abandoned. And this is where I decided to set up my architectural office. These are some of my colleagues. At our busiest in Vardø, we were about 7 colleagues at our office. That made us actually one of the bigger private employing businesses in Vardø. And we're a team of architects, but also highly dedicated nature enthusiasts. And the latter is the important. I think for myself, I consider myself as my passion being nature, and my profession is being an architect. And I share this through, I guess, designing buildings that aim to connect people with nature. And that's what we've been doing exclusively as an architecture office since 2009. So just to give you a little bit of background, this is back in like the mid-90s or something like that. I would always go out every weekend I could. I would just go out bird watching or being in nature and finding new and exciting places to visit. And when I was not being outside in nature, whenever I was at school or I was at home, I would spend time drawing birds or reading about birds, reading about nature, and really trying to understand how varied nature is, and how, there is essentially so much to learn about nature, and I just wanted to know it all and learn about every species that I saw. Like this bird that you see here, this is a waxwing, that's what it's called. And I wanted to learn everything about it. I wanted to understand, like, how do you separate a male waxwing from a female waxwing, and from a young waxwing from an adult waxwing. And I really wanted to investigate nature in a, well, I would say fairly nerdy manner. And I think that's a mindset that kind of fits well with being an architect, at least the investigative part and the dedication and interest. However, during my architecture school years, I would say I became a little bit disillusioned in many ways about architecture and about architects, because I felt during my years as an architecture student, I learned way too much about star architects and super spectacular buildings and incredible projects and massive projects, and I was like, it didn't really connect with me as a person being very much into nature and into ecology and into biology, and essentially not being that interested in the built environment. But at the same time, I thought there is something missing in the architecture scene. So when I was finished, I moved back to Trondheim, that's my hometown, and you see the image in the lower corner. I'm not sure if you see my cursor at the moment. But in the image in the lower corner is of a river delta, and that's a river delta called Gaulosen. It's essentially where I spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours just as a bird watching and seeing nature. It's one of these, one of the few remaining intact river deltas in Northern Europe. And you had this new project happening, like an industrial harbor project. And I thought, and it was being promoted as one of the environment projects of the decade or something like that. And of course, as a keen nature enthusiast, I realized that this isn't in fact an environment project, and I had to engage almost against this project. But this is essentially what is happening with nature all over the world. You have intact nature that are of high value meaning it's biodiverse and it's intense biodiversity. And that doesn't happen at every place, everywhere. So a lot of people who do not engage with nature and don't have insights into nature, they will think that, well, nature can move, so the birds can move, and nature can happen elsewhere. Let us just do this project at this place. But I mean, just like people, I think birds and wild nature have its desires and its needs and its patterns of movement, patterns of migration, patterns of where they stay, where they breed, where they rest, where they find food. And a river delta, like you see here, is one of the most important places for wildlife and bird life. And it's similarly important to wildlife as cities are to us humans. So I thought, I'm going to be the architect that works to promote nature. I'm not going to be the architect who helps destroying nature or just building nature away just because we think nature can move elsewhere. And I guess that set me on a journey to do my own studies after architecture school. So one of my first places to visit was actually New York. After architecture school, I went to New York. What you see in this aerial photo or satellite image is Manhattan, famously so, and Central Park as the very big, very green rectangle. Central Square, or the Central Park in New York, is actually one of the most well-known burning places in USA. And that's quite funny because you wouldn't think of it as a biodiverse place, but it is. And it's due, essentially due to the lack of intense management. It's biodiverse because a lot of birds will travel over New York and Manhattan on their migration, southbound migration or northbound migration, and they will see Central Park as a green lung of life and potential life. And the way that happens is that a lot of the nature they have built, because it's built nature in Central Park, is unmanaged. So the condition of not managing something actually creates a lot of biodiversity. And I found that to be hugely interesting because it kind of proves you can have a lot of biodiversity and a lot of people at the same time if you only understand how nature works. So I think one of the learnings are green is not necessarily good. And what you see here in this image, they are close-ups taken from that same satellite image I just showed you. So this is to the left, that's zoomed in on a part of Central Park that is called the Ramble, and it's absolutely amazing. You can even, just by looking at this kind of green, you can see the diversity of trees, you can see there's a lot of water, which is important. Then juxtaposed to this, you can see another type of green that is absolutely useless. It's got the same biodiversity, I would say, as a paved parking lot. I think that was a misconception. You would often hear in architecture school as long as it's green there, it's kind of good. As long as you put in green, it becomes ecological, it becomes sustainable. I think that is really not the case. So I kept studying. I kept trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And where can I go to find people or organizations or companies that work in an interesting way architecturally with the nature. And I did find that. I essentially found that in UK. And I guess what's happened in UK is you have so many people, you have so much cultivated land that somehow a lot of people, millions of people in fact, have realized that the nature we have destroyed needs to be rebuilt. And this has resulted in some very, very innovative projects. I would say the organization RSPB, that's Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, are by far making and doing the most interesting architecture projects today. I would say all these star architects and super fancy, very big, very cool offices, they're not even close to delivering anything of interest compared to what the RSPB is doing. What you see in this image is essentially architecture. This would be urbanism for birds, urbanism for insects, plants, and nature. But it's all planned, it's all man-made. And I guess I discovered this in 2000, this was about, 2014, something like that. And I started traveling around looking at nature reserve in intensely populated areas, like in UK, and discovering that they were essentially making nature from scratch, from depleted agricultural land, from old gravel mines, and essentially taking places that had very little or no biological value. And then over years of ecological engineering, in a way, they were turning nature, or lack of nature, into intense biodiversity and spectacular nature. At the same time, they're inviting a lot of people. So this is Minsmere, and it's actually, it's a nature reserve that has something like 80,000 to 100,000 visitors every year, which is quite a lot. And they have this incredible biodiversity and variety in bird species, in plant species, and insect species. And this intensely biodiverse place is of so high ecological value that without it, you would see a difference in the populations of a lot of bird species. And as an architect, I was almost stunned not to have heard about this in architecture school. And I thought, I'm going to be a part of this scene. I'm going to be a part, as an architect, a part of this nature conservation scene. However, this is a scene almost void of architects, because architects, unfortunately, are not that interested in nature, it seems. It seems we like to go into cultural projects and doing, culturally significant projects. And the nature scene is basically left without designers. That's the consequence. We're left without designers, architects, and the creative disciplines. So when it comes to what is being designed for people in the nature scene, it's basically left over to random, and well, whatever works just works. And that's what I discovered. So what you're seeing here is essentially bird hides, that's what they're called. And these are the kind of shelters and small pieces of architecture that are scattered around these nature reserves that are, I would say, engineering-wise, architectural-wise, landscape architecture-wise, they are like true marvels. I mean, they are incredibly inventive, innovative, and forward-thinking in a way that I don't think the world have realized yet. But it's presented in the most poor and, I would say, poor and boring manner. And I thought, I'm going to be a part of this scene and to try to somehow improve how we present nature, how we experience nature. So I decided I'm going to go into bird hides. I'm going to be the architect who starts doing bird hides, because, I mean, this is some of what you will see. This is what's being offered to people who visit nature reserves. And to me, just putting up a fence, trying to hide people away from nature in a, I would say, very uninspiring way is, well, that's not the right way to showcase such beautiful projects like the Minsmere Nature Reserve. Which kind of brings me to Vardø. So this is maybe a little bit of a weird turn to take, but the headline in this is a newspaper clip from 2009. It's the year I moved to Vardø, the furthest northern city or town in Norway. And the basic headline of this is Vardø is the worst place for business. So it's basically ranked Vardø as the worst community in Norway. And I decided this is the place I'm going to move to. This is an image from Main Street in Vardø. Like, it's abandoned house, it's leftover vehicles. It's basically the looks of a place that have kind of given up a little bit. And that was also the sentiment in Vardø when I moved there. You could really feel there was I would say almost like a collective depression in the town. And I can totally understand it, because it is a town that has been living off of natural resources for centuries. And all of a sudden you have, and this is kind of multifaceted, you have big businesses coming in, buying the rights to the fishing quotas, taking them away from the community. It's quite complex, the politics and business behind it, but the result is very clear, and it's to the detriment of this community. At the same time, you would find something like this. And this is an image from, it's called Hornøya. It's a bird cliff, just 10 minutes boat trip outside of Vardø town. And in the distance in this image, you can see like scattered little houses, roofs in the distance. That's actually Vardø Island. And when I moved to Vardø, I just tried to convince people that, hey, you guys, you should go into bird watching. You should go into ecotourism. You should go into, well, telling the story and showing your unique nature. And that could be something to build upon that will be unique for Vardø, and that will attract a lot of visitors from around the world. And it will even become a part of your economy and a part of how you can rebuild the community. And I guess, of course, a lot of people were just shaking their heads, thinking this is the most stupid idea that they've ever heard. And I can understand that sentiment, but at the same time, a lot of people who lived in Vardø hadn't even visited this island, because who cares about the birds when you live from fishing? And when the fishing is taken away from you, then I guess it can be hard to see new opportunities. I guess I was that person who came from the outside, being a visitor to this community, and also a type of visitor that knew about this deep passion and interest for nature and for bird life and for just extraordinary nature. So I just started showing people this image. And essentially, what people started to realize is that around the world, you have an audience of millions of people who love nature and birds, and who love exotic Arctic places, and would love to go there and experience a place like Vardø. They just didn't know about it. Because how would you? No one had told the story. So that's what I tried to do. So this is, call it a conceptual image, conceptual graphic. It's made back in 2008-9. And it essentially described the key selling points for the region. And that's part of what I think we do as architects, and what architects are good at is distilling something and clarifying what it is, explaining it, and then actually try to build the idea and make the idea a reality. So this image, I showed it to a lot of people in it's called the Varanger. The region is called Varanger, and the town is called Vardø. And essentially the size of this region is, I guess if you look at a field called Iconic Birds, and from the southernmost part of the road to the northernmost part of the road, that's a day's drive, just to give you a sense of the size of the area. And what's unique with this area is that this is probably this is the one and only place in the world where you can have Arctic coast, Arctic tundra, and taiga within a day's drive. And if you were a bird watcher or keen nature enthusiast, you will know that in these big types of nature, like the taiga or the tundra, you have a specific set of very exotic and special bird species, or animals and wildlife and plants as well. The region has very accessible infrastructure. So these key things put together gives Varanger I would say, the possibility to become an internationally famous bird-watching destination or nature destination. And that's what we try to do as a company. So I guess when we started Biotope, like I mentioned, a lot of people didn't think this was a good idea because, of course, we're going to start making architecture for bird watchers in a half-abandoned fishing community sat at the edge of the world in the Arctic. A lot of people thought that was a very silly idea. And I guess to make things happen or to make things look like they were happening, we just essentially started painting bird watchers around the town because to be truthful, there weren't that many bird watchers visiting. But we just decided to paint them on walls. And as well as doing that, we started arranging birdwatching festivals. So we arranged this bird festival we called Gullfest. And that's essentially a festival for gulls. I guess it was kind of random that we came up with the theme gulls, but a lot of people consider gulls to be the most boring type of birds. Of course, they're not. If you're into birds, into nature, you know that, like in Vardø, you have something like 17 different gull species being seen. And they are quite incredible in what they do. They migrate incredible distances. They have a huge diversity in how they behave and where you can find them and how they look. So we essentially invited scientists, we invited artists, to be keynote speakers in the local pub called North Pole Pub, Nordpol Kro. It's a very special place you should visit. It's a 150-year-old pub. It's quite unique. And there we had this, I would say, quite specially themed talks where you would have international key figures in the nature conservation community meeting fishermen hanging out talking about gulls. It was quite a cool experience, to be honest. And now we've done that festival for 9 years in a row. We also used art. I think art and architecture and the creative fields is something that's missing, very much missing in, I would say, in the nature scene. There is a lot of biologists, ecologists, science-minded people. But I think what we're trying to do is to invite more creative-minded people into the scene. And I think creative-minded people, like architects or artists, have the ability to engage just the public in a more emotional, and connect on a more emotional level. And that is important as well. I mean, science has the ability to factually and scientifically describe things, but it doesn't always connect emotionally. And I think that's what we as architects can do as well. So we've done quite a lot. We've done quite a lot of science projects as well, like this one here. We've done a lot of bird ringing projects, like school kids to be a part of that as well, because I think bringing the young generations into what we're doing is important. We've done quite a lot of things, like, I mean, now I'm talking, well, I'm obviously invited because we're an architectural office, but as an architectural office, we decided that we're not just doing architecture, we're creating festivals. Like, and in this case, we're writing a guidebook for the region when that is required, or when we think that is what is going to make a big difference for the community. So this guidebook, it's about 230 pages. It's a complete guidebook to the best nature sites in the region. And this book has now sold over 4,000 copies, and it's been sold to something like 50 plus countries. And it's been a key part of having a lot of people visiting the region. Again, it's about making the region and destination available and and essentially creating the story about what the region is. And of course, the architecture, that's just a part of it. So now let me come to the architecture. And then the question is, like, how do you invite people to an Arctic climate? So do you just invite them to sit in the snow and be cold and feel freezing and feel like this hostile environment is just that, hostile? And I guess that's been what we have tried to do in Varanger. We tried to create a lot of almost, I would call it friendliness in an otherwise hostile climate and a hostile condition. So this is the south point in Vardø. It's actually just a couple of 100 meters from the town center. And it's the first bird hide or wind shelter we built in Vardø. And the principle is very basic. As long as you're well dressed, I mean warmly dressed, you can stay outside for hours, but it's the wind chill that's the big killer, essentially. So if you didn't have this shelter, you wouldn't, I mean, basically you wouldn't stay there for much more than 5 minutes because it's really freezing. You can have minus 20 Celsius and gale force winds, and those are quite chilling conditions. But if you want to discover bird life that's unique on a global scale, these are the conditions that you have to face. So what you're seeing here is just a very small portion of all the eiders that are found in the waters around Vardø. And we've been registering birds around Vardø Island for many years, and we've seen flocks of something like 17,000 king eiders, 20+ thousand eiders, 6,000 long-tailed ducks, a couple of thousand Steller's eiders. And I mean, if you were bird watchers, these are like highly impressive numbers of species that are globally rare and that you would normally be happy if you saw one of them. Here you can see thousands of them. And I've been standing here with like bird watchers coming from UK, coming from Australia, coming from essentially all over the world. And they've been describing how this is some of the most amazing nature experiences that they have ever had. It's something like they describe it similarly to how they, in awe, speak of Serengeti or more famous places. And if you ask me, Vardø has the same potential to be this world-class nature destination. And that's essentially what we've been trying to build as well for the past few years. So what you're seeing here is actually the same shelter that I showed you just a couple of slides back. This one. And essentially you will have the bird watchers and the nature photographers visiting in winter, and in summer you will basically find that everyone is just using the shelter to enjoy themselves and just sit there, make a fire, and just enjoy the scenery. And of course, this as well creates an understanding of the value of the nature around you. And just to briefly speak of the designs, I mean, as an architecture company, I think our credo is more like how little is enough. And I'm not just talking less is more or anything like that. It's just like how little do you need to do to make the exactly desired impact. Like it's the opposite of the star architecture approach, where you try to do as much as you can and as flamboyant as you can. It's more like, yeah, what's necessary. Even sometimes nothing is necessary. Nothing is the best approach. And a lot of times that's what we advise clients to do. I mean, do nothing. And other times it's about setting up a small shelter. And when it is, you see that the way we design things is we want the shelters that we design to be open and inviting. So there isn't a door here. It's simply a bench that is built in such a way that we have considered wind directions, and what you want to view. I mean, just finding the site itself, I would say, is half the architecture. But again, making architecture that feels open and inviting is key to what we do. And of course, architecture as well, when you make architecture in nature, it can be a way to guide people. It's essentially a way of telling people where is the best place to sit and experience something. Because a piece of architecture like this, it's on a bird cliff, Hornøya, and with the increasing numbers of bird watchers visiting, nature photographers as well, that can have a disturbance on the local bird life. So what happened before we had this shelter built was that people was visiting the island, they were just walking quite freely around the island, and this irregular and just a random pattern of walking, was essentially the stressful part for birds, because they never knew where people was going to walk. And essentially we solved this by architecture. By putting up this bird hide or wind shelter, we essentially created the best place to sit, and it's almost like a place where you can welcome people to sit, and the birds will always know that this is where the people are. And as long as we stay within these parameters of certain pathways that were created and the shelters that are built, the birds don't mind. So it's about guiding people as well as creating predictability for the local bird life. And of course, when you build these shelters, this is the same shelter on the opening day, where we had a kindergarten involved. So they were essentially cutting the ribbon and opening the hide. And again, for Varde's part, it was the beginning, I would say, of the local communities starting to accept, well, the fact that they were a world-class birdwatching destination or a world-class nature destination, and they would appreciate the full width of what that meant. It wasn't just a fishing community, it was actually a nature community, a community that is rich in resources. And I remember my daughter as well, she went to the kindergarten in Varde, and at one point they painted the entire bird cliff of Hornøya inside on the kindergarten wall, and then they put up images of all the birds on that wall. So every kid in Varde knew the name of every bird in the community. And I thought that was quite amazing to see this change and to see this awareness of nature happen. And as well, this is the local carpenter. This guy is called Ken. He's built a lot of our projects. He's a really great carpenter. And again, these are small projects and they are quite easy to do. And they have, at least for the Varde part, we've tried to involve a lot of local people when we've done these projects. And of course, this is like the end project. This specific site here is, it's actually the town previously, the town dump. The place is called the dump, or Tippen, as it's called in Norwegian. And this used to be just a garbage dump for Varde, while with this project, we aim to clean up the area because it actually has the best views towards Hornøya Bird Cliff. That's the island you see in the distance. And it's now been a place that is being visited by tourists, and it's being visited by the local community who equally use the bird hides and the shelter. And we're currently in progress of designing a hotel, like a landscape hotel, that will have great views similar to this on this, well, previous dump. So I guess what we're doing as architects, we're essentially trying to flip the image from being this, place that didn't think of itself as unique, and we're trying to use architecture to make people realize that it is actually unique. This place is called Domen Viewpoint. It overviews the Barents Sea. You will see Russia in the east. You can see there's basically the North Pole towards the north, and the water around here is just filled with the birds and whales and incredible wildlife. And now we're designing so people can sit there and actually enjoy that incredible wildlife. We were also working quite extensively with the tourism businesses in the region. So this is just one example of a project we've been doing. It's a small-scale project done for a tourism business called Kongsfjord Guest House. The owner was Åse, and she basically needed a place to let her visitors sit and enjoy the scenery, because a lot of her visitors are people from big cities, from Amsterdam and from London and from wherever in the world, that she invited to her place, but she didn't really have anywhere or focal points for their visit. So we built this project and it ended up looking like this. It's a very small scale project. And again, the idea is to create something and to build something where, I guess like I said, half the architecture is finding the site and finding a place that tells a story and design something that matches that story. And well, this is a different story. And again, it is in Varanger, and it's an industrial harbor. So we built this concrete nature shelter, and you can see it on this design that you have two sheltered spaces. One is sheltering you from the southern winds, and the other, on the opposite, is sheltering you from the northern winds. And you will have spectacular views of the harbor, because similar to fishermen, birds or eiders and seabirds will also seek shelter in the harbor. So the man-made harbors in the Arctic can be one of the most spectacular bird sites, like you have in UK, like you're building your natural environment. Well, you have the same in Norway. We're kind of building a natural environment based on sheltering people from the harsh conditions of nature. And it turns out birds need shelter from the same harsh conditions. So they will essentially flock to the harbors of Varanger as well. And the places or the species you can see here are some of the most amazing species I've ever seen, like the king eiders or the Steller's eider. So zooming out a little bit, what you see here is a destination map we made for Varanger. So I guess a lot of people think of Biotope being this small company doing small projects or small buildings, but essentially we're doing small buildings and small projects, and that's what we want to do. But we think of ourselves as much as we are small building architects, we're also destination architects as well, and we really try to architect big concepts, but the results can be quite small, or the built structures can be small, and their impact can be quite big. So this little slide, I mean, sometimes you have slides about statistics can be a little bit boring, but I find this particular statistic to be quite interesting. It's a consultancy company who did a measurement of the financial growth in Varanger, the region we've been working with. So 2008, you can see there's a very big dip. This is the dark blue line, that's Varanger region. So there's a very big dip in Varanger. Of course, that corresponds to the financial crisis of 2008-9, and as well as just the general decline in the community. What we have done, or rather what was measured, is that from 2010 to 2015, there was an 80% value growth within the tourism scene or tourism business scene. And that was something like twice or triple as much as businesses in the rest of Norway. And much of this relates to the development of tourism, and in particular, bird watching as the main theme of the ecotourism or nature-based tourism in Varanger. So I mean, the previous, what I've said about this development and kind of creating nature awareness and doing projects that are about nature conservation and awareness can also be financially good. And that was the whole idea with us as an architecture company starting or aiming to work with tourism was essentially trying to create an economic argument around nature. So essentially, if it's good economy, it's good ecology. That was our little tagline that we used as a company. And we wanted to kind of prove that right, and thereby creating more interest and more acceptance of the idea that we need to take care of nature. And then the other thing happened. I hope I'm not talking too long here. I see we're already at 50 minutes. I'll make this last part fairly fast. And so the latter part of what we hoped would happen when moving to Vardø was that Biotope would become an international company, in the sense that our ideas would spread. And through the visiting nature enthusiasts, nature photographers, bird watchers, etc. So we hope that they would visit our region and see that how we designed nature shelters, bird hides, nature photography hides, and so forth would have an appeal outside of Varangier region. And essentially we've been, I guess, developing a special expertise as a company on designing for special interest groups within the nature scene. And that led us to doing projects like at the RSPB, which I talked about in the beginning, like how RSPB is one of these, I would say, essentially most innovative landscape designing companies in the world, like no question. And somehow we managed to get their attention, and now we're essentially designing nature shelters for their new nature reserve projects in, for example, Wallasey. We've done a whole series of projects for the RSPB since, like in Salton, in North UK, in Dorset, as well as quite a few other places. Since we've actually been invited to quite a lot of countries to do projects, I mean, as far away from north of Norway, like you see there. So we've done projects in Falkland Islands. We've been invited to the Tibetan Plateau to look at snow leopard projects. And I guess for us as a company, we started being this weird little bird watching company, and we're still this weird little company that are exploring new ideas of how to connect people with nature. We're always testing new ideas. Like here, we're creating essentially a small photo hide where you can act like a turtle. You can cover yourself with a hide and you can get very close to birds, because essentially birds won't notice you as long as you don't move. And they don't see movement. And again, taking small ideas and scaling them up, that's always what we try to do. And this is a floating photography hide, and the idea is to just get as close as possible to bird life. And this is a king eider close-up. You remember the species like one of these birds I told you, we had 17,000 of these guys, and this is the close-up of one. And well, if you ask me, being an architect and from the creative disciplines, I think nature is by far the best designer, I think. And well, this is just to show you some of the variety of what we're doing. This is a nature-based or nature classroom. There's an outdoor amphitheater. There's a bird tower section on it. And here's like a miniature cafe in a treetop cabin. And this is a mountaintop viewpoint in a place called Loppa in West Finnmark in North Norway. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're creating architecture for nature experiences. And I guess for us, what you see from the architecture is almost that is actually the important thing. It's not necessarily the architecture itself, and it's being in nature. That's the key thing for us as an architecture company. And well, that's essentially a little bit longer than brief history about the Biotope and what we are doing as a company. So thank you guys, and thanks for inviting me to present what we're doing. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tormod, it was very, very exciting. And my first question would be, who are actually, or who has been the first clients of you when you moved to this, let's say, abandoned small city that you
Yeah.
survived there as an architect of 7 people, actually, architect's office?
I see. Well, that's a good question because, well, who will be your client when no one is asking for what you want to do, right? So that was a challenge. So I would say some of the first projects we did, we more or less financed ourselves. We managed for a couple of projects to get the building materials founded, but we spent all the time building it. We built them ourselves. We developed the ideas. We essentially we paid for it ourselves as a company. And then quite quickly we found the momentum, because what we did created quite a lot of international interest right away. And I'm not talking international interest among architects, because I mean architects, I have almost not been talking with architects for something like 10 years. But this international nature conservation audience and birdwatching audience, nature photographer audience, they very much paid attention to what we were doing. And we were communicating with that audience all the time through blogs, through videos, through newsletters, through social media, and through, after a while, meeting all these people in Varanger, where we invited them to come and visit. So I guess after the few first self-financed projects, we kind of got the nature authorities on board, and they started commissioning us to do projects, and as well as the road authorities, because, well, when you're in the Arctic, in Varanger, you're just using roads to get around. It's not, well, the car is your main transport thing. So we contacted the road authorities through this project called National Tourist Routes, or Scenic Routes, I guess it's called. And they started financing a few of our projects. And today we're working with communities, tourism businesses, and nature conservation organizations, and quite a big variety of companies, organizations are commissioning projects from us.
Great. So this was a kind of success story from, well, like a story of a self-made man.
Yeah. Well,
I just want to encourage our dear guests and students that they are not allowed or invited to ask questions. And if you ask, please, you could would be so kind and turn on your cameras, because we would like to see faces and not only icons. Do we have some questions right now immediately? Monica?
I would just maybe develop of like what you partially just answered, but still what I found like very incredible at your practice is that you developed the whole strategy of like how to actually build tourism in a place that wasn't touristic at all. And like a part of from being a very creative architect and being an enthusiastic bird watcher, you also have this, I find it like very smart, strategical thinking, like something that maybe we can see that the majors of some progressive cities do, like when they want to implement some like new way of using the public space, they start exactly with this, like little interventions of like actually shown as like painting the walls, or just like inviting the community to sort of gather and like slowly build this. And so I was just thinking, like, did you come up with this all by yourself, or you've been like consulting the whole strategy? That's very impressive.
Well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. I much appreciate that. I guess, yeah, in many ways it was in the beginning. I would say it was not ideas or strategies that was well developed. we tried a million things. We tried a whole bunch of things, and just some of them worked, some didn't. And I think it was more, well, I guess when you move to a place like Vardø, and there was no plan B, like it was moving to Vardø and make this work, whatever the cost, right? So again, I mean, we were building the first shelters ourselves. We were finding the finance ourselves. Like the first shelter we built, I remember we borrowed the fishing garage from an old fisherman in Vardø, who was the only person who didn't think we were complete lunatics and that actually had the space available, and he would let us build this weird bird shelter in his fishing garage. And I think it was more, I guess if there was a strategy, the strategy was to put myself in a place where you had no plan B or no alternative, but to actually make it work, whatever the cost was. And I think that's basically what we have been doing. But I think, yeah, so the strategy, I guess, was developed just as things progressed. And it was inspired, I would say, by quite quickly getting in touch with just key people in, I would say, the international nature conservation community. It was very quickly, we were all of a sudden talking with BBC Nature. We were talking with some of the best nature artists in the world, because, I mean, we were doing something new in a very exciting and exotic place, and we became a voice from the north that I think hadn't properly been heard before, and that created the grounds for a lot of attention, essentially, to that we benefited from. So I would say, yeah, a lot of our ideas we came up with. Obviously, doing street art figures like this, it isn't new. It isn't our idea to do this. It's more like, I mean, you had people coming to us and say, why the hell has Banksy been in Vardø, right? So it's not like we created this. It's more like we just we just made our version of it in a place that we felt that we belonged to, but also we wanted to make it belong to a much bigger audience than just Vardø and the community of Vardø. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a half answer to what you're asking.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think the answer would be like, yeah, as you said in the beginning, no plan B.
Yeah. Definitely.
Thank you.
We already have one question from the side of the students. Unfortunately, written and not put like on camera, but whatever, I will read it. Thank you for your presentation. Carolina is writing, have you ever considered making similar concepts for different kind of animals?
Yes, definitely. And we've been making projects for animals and plants, and we've been creating projects for watching northern lights and for just enjoying the wind and for sitting and watching whales or orcas and dolphins. And I mean, I've kind of told you the story about how Biotope started, and in many ways it started with bird watching, but today we're a much more diversified company in that we're designing projects for kayak paddlers and for mountain hikers and for like a wide variety of nature niches or people with a passion for nature. I guess that's the common theme, I would say. But we're not doing projects like we're not designing a garage or housing in urban areas or cultural buildings or parking lots or whatever. I mean, we're strictly nature in what we do, but that can be a quite wide niche. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. As you started to explain your experience from the UK sites, which was very exciting, this urbanism for birds and for insects. So I saw that perhaps your way of designing is moving somehow in a direction of non-anthropocentric approach to design. But at the same time now you said that, okay, we design for people who are actually taking photographs or making a kind of sport. So where do you feel more comfortable, or what is your, let's say, a dream job? Designing for people or for other creatures?
Yeah.
Beings and human, because this is a question. This is the question, actually.
It's a very good question. It's spot on, actually, because how we are thinking of ourselves. I mean, obviously now we had like 1 hour. I had to show like a fairly narrow selection of the projects we're doing, and it's kind of describing the story of Biotope from starting point to, well, fairly recent. But actually we are designing projects for other species already. I mean, we've designed a hotel for kittiwakes. We're designing. I mean, essentially, we're moving towards building for biodiversity. So, meaning, we don't want to be a company that is doing human-centric architecture. We want to do biodiversity architecture, and obviously, humans, we're a part of defining what ecology. Or we're actually, well, we're essentially defining the ecosystems of today, like global wide. We are affecting and defining the ecosystems of today, and somehow we want to be a part of designing in such a way that humans become much more aware of all the other inhabitants of the world. Because I mean, humans, we are one part of it, but we are actually just one part of it. But we have that skill set and opportunity and power as well to affect all the other species on the planet. And I mean, that sounds like very big fancy words, and obviously I'm not in a position to do that much about it, but at least I can be one of the architects that design in a way that positively affects nature. And also what I want to do is to showcase and promote organizations like the RSPB, which I would say, to their detriment, they are not that good at promoting what they are doing. They are great at connecting people with nature from their perspective, but they are actually not connecting their work enough, at least where it matters. So if you ask me, all the architecture schools in the world should do study trips to UK and look at nature reserves, because this is architecture. And if I can be a part of promoting that as well, and somehow bringing attention to that kind of thinking and also architecting for that kind of thinking, then that's what I want to do. Yeah.
Thank you. We are all the people sitting here in our broadcasting studio. We are very much like enthusiastic, asking you more and more questions. But
Sure.
I would like to have some questions from side of our students. But till they decide or till they encourage themselves to ask, there is another question from Monica.
Yes, because like this is really the topic that we discuss like so much, and I think it's the time to ask the crucial question that always comes up at one point, which is like, I understand that by like creating the shelters and the hides, you want people to come to this very harsh Arctic places to watch the wild nature, in order to like relate to nature and like become enthusiasts as well, and to be able to protect the nature, because they only can protect it once they understand it.
Yeah.
But do you think there are places where there should be like no structures for humans built, because it should only belong to nature itself and remain completely untouched?
Yes. Definitely yes. It's a very good question, and the answer is yes. There are a lot of places where just people should stay away. Like, don't disturb, don't interfere. I mean, I'm promoting like the UK mindset and skill set of engineering and architecting nature reserves, right? But they're doing it out of, well, because they've in the first place messed it up and destroyed it. So obviously the best thing to do is not to, well, to put it bluntly, don't fuck it up in the first place. And a lot of times that means, I mean, don't destroy the river deltas, don't destroy the forest if you don't have to. But if you don't have any motivation or incentive or understanding of what you are destroying, then you're just going to do just that. You are going to destroy it. But then if you do that, then, well, I guess we need to build a skill set of how we can work with nature and build more nature, and how we can care for more species than ourselves. But yes, and so that's like the general answer. And I think the specific answer to what we are doing, I talked very briefly about the guidebook that we made. The guidebook was essentially based on a very, like a several year long study of the Varanger region, where we visited, like, I think, like I'm almost going to say all of the places on the Varanger Peninsula, including all the nature reserves, the national park, and well, yeah, a lot of places. And we decided that a very high number of the places we visited, we decided not to put into the guidebook and not to design something for and not to build something for, simply because the best thing is to stay away. And that's never been a problem. Like, I've yet to meet bird watchers, nature photographers, or others visiting Varanger complaining about that there wasn't enough to see. Yeah, so again, it's a little bit back to the point I made earlier about how little is enough, and sometimes nothing is enough, and nothing is the best thing to do. Yeah, so thanks. It's a good question, and yeah, I hope it's a fairly okay answer for that question.
Definitely, thank you. We have a comment from the side of our student Anna. She writes, I actually do not have a question. I just need to say you make me to want immediately move to Norway and watch birds in their natural habitat for the rest of my life. I hope I will visit these sites once. Thank you. It was a brilliant presentation. So,
well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I hope there will be no too much people in your area after this, because this is also not that much wanted.
Yeah. But it's also about educating the people that visit. So when we make a guidebook, a big part of the guidebook that we made is about how to conduct yourself in nature. Like, when you visit these places, how do you behave? Which species do you need to stay away from? Some species, if you see them, you shouldn't even tell someone else that you have seen them, because they are in fact endangered species, and you might not want to expose a breeding place, for example, for a particular, let's say, a gyrfalcon or something like that. So I think, again, it's essentially education and being aware. So I think for the type of visitors that we have been part of, well, attracting to our region, they are very well aware of how to behave and how not to behave. And that makes them a good kind of tourists and visitors. And I mean, I could make a keynote just around the type of ecotourism we've been working with. That could easily be a keynote in itself, and there's a lot of things to say about it. But yeah, education and awareness is key. And thanks for the kind compliments as well.
Thank you, and I would like to encourage Alban. You've been there to ask questions, so please.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if, like, you in your office, do you have any kind of restriction? Like you did it, like you to use any kind of materials? Because I saw that in some areas, in beginning, all of them, the shelters, the benches was made by wood, and after that I saw some with concrete. One of them was with concrete, and another one I guess was with steel.
Yeah.
And another question is, have you built or have you designed or are you thinking to build any bench that you can move, or people who are using, they can move on, like for any kind of reason, like wind reason or something, like in different kind of the year, for example, because sometimes maybe you need to move the bench.
Yeah. Well, I see what you mean. Essentially what we're doing when we are designing, we're trying to design in such a way that whichever wind direction or whichever wind condition or weather condition we have, that you will find a sheltered space, which is why in our projects you will often find multiple spaces within one building. So that makes the same building valid in winter as well as in summer, but they will have slightly different uses in both winter and summer. We have designed a few projects where you actually move them around, where it's almost like mobile architecture. These are particularly photography hides, where what you want to experience is maybe very specific species of birds or very specific behaviors that might only happen in May or only happen in harbors in winter. So I guess, yeah, the answer is yes. Of course, the smaller it is, the easier it is to move, but we are doing architecture mostly, and I guess designing in such a way that it has flexible functionality in terms of the calendar of the year. That's important for a lot of buildings. I don't think you should just design something that is valid for 2 months of the year and then it just sits there and is a disturbance in your view or something like that. So yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Cornelius. You can. It's your turn now.
Actually, I was curious as to perhaps you just skip over it, or maybe just very quickly, but how exactly did you convince the local population or the local community to actually embrace this this concept of ecotourism? How did knowing what you know now, what strategies would you recommend we consider when you want to make a change, when you want to do something, and you want people to take part of this, even though they might be stubborn or apprehensive in the beginning?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the totally truthful answer to this is the benefit of, well, first of all, I wanted to move to Vardø, not because the community was so struck by bad circumstance. I wanted to move there because I've read about Vardø in bird books and in books about nature. Since I was a little kid, I just read about the rich nature of the Arctic, and Vardø featured in many of those books. So that was my primary reason for moving there. But the fact that Vardø was essentially a poor community and a very much a struggling community also presented a kind of an opportunity, in that I knew I was going to move to somewhere and bring ideas that just seemed totally out of place and stupid, which is what today it feels obvious and kind of not strange, but in 2008 all of these ideas seemed just completely out of place. And I guess for a community that is struggling to the level that you're ranked as the worst community in your country, you're kind of open to new ideas, because how bad can it get? You're already fucked. So, why not embrace this craziest idea? And if it flies, it flies. And if not, then fuck it, we're not getting any worse. So I guess that's the truthful answer is like, I guess we were afforded a lot of goodwill just simply by moving to this place and just giving it a go and see if it would actually fly. And I think a lot of people very quickly went from just shaking their heads and thinking this is just a really silly idea to seeing and realizing that this actually works. It brings tourists, it brings visitors to the region, and it brings with it a better economy for the region. So yeah, I think when you're at that point, you're allowed to do more than you might if you just move to some place that is very well off and where everything's functional and everything works. I think the opportunity to maybe innovate and to make new things happen is sometimes bigger in a place where well, I guess where you can be allowed to just test things that seem out of place and seem not logical to do, at least from the surface. So yeah, I hope that's a decent answer to that question.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We have one written, let's say, question, or it is more a kind of critical remark from our student Martin.
Yeah.
Have you considered the fact that architecture for the many species of animals is probably made by the nature itself? Let me further explain my point. Isn't the architecture you are making for the animals in the end of the day just an artificial addition to already perfect architecture of nature, which was needed because of previous human invasion?
The sound, sorry, I think I understood what you meant. The sound was a little bit choppy, but I guess...
Well, the question was if it is needed, if there was not everything before as you started your design, that actually nature itself built kind of architecture or let's say places for observing animals anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, so my answer is, again, I think in the instance of Varanger, where we worked a lot, 90% of our impact is explaining and deciding and figuring out where not to do anything, because not doing anything is the best choice. Leaving nature to do its own thing is the best choice. But a lot of times that's just not good enough. Just leaving nature alone, not interfering and not, or rather interacting, that would be the best approach. So what, for example, the RSPB is doing, that's interacting. It's not interfering because they are improving conditions over creating worse conditions. So I guess that's what we try to do as well, is to create conditions where architecture does not happen at the expense of nature. And I think, unfortunately, mostly architecture does happen at the expense of nature. And if we can somehow move towards creating architecture that embraces nature, or at least creates awareness around nature, then and improving the conditions for nature, then I think that's a very good thing. I'm not 100% sure if I answered your question, because the sound was a little bit choppy, but at least that's my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. You already touched it before that this is actually like sometimes it's useful not to do nothing, but sometimes you can add something. There was one question on my mind during your lecture, because looking at the forms of the shelters, there are a kind of similarities. Let's say, are you like designing each time a kind of unique structure, or are you dealing with kind of modular shelters or some kind of, let's say, unification, or if I can put it like this, prototype?
Yeah. Well, Yes and yes. We're essentially we're doing both. We're doing custom projects for very specific places that we visit. That's one part of what we're doing, and I guess understanding the place you work, understanding the ecology, understanding the landscape, the wildlife, and also as well as the people who visit or live there is important, and that should, when it's optional or functional or makes sense, be met by custom-made architecture, because conditions are very often quite unique. Different places require different answers. But at the same time, a lot of places have similar functionalities and or similar qualities. So I would say what we're also doing is creating that at the office we call them habitat-specific projects. By that I mean we are designing projects that fit in certain habitats that you will find in several places. We're not just doing a copy-paste series of models that can fit anywhere, because I don't think one piece of architecture can fit anywhere. There isn't like a one-size-fits-all, but there is this condition of habitat-specific projects. So we're essentially creating pieces of architecture that make sense in certain types of wetland. We're creating architecture pieces that make sense in wind-ridden tundra areas, and the conditions would be different for these types of habitats or types of landscapes. So yeah, the question is, yes, we're both doing custom projects when that is appropriate, and we're doing habitat-specific projects when that is appropriate.
Yeah, of course. One more question, how big is your office right now? Have you been growing in the last years? And if you are perhaps open to a kind of study space from sides of students, etc.
Well, right now we're kind of doing a semi-big move for the company, because we're splitting the company in two. We're actually setting up the architectural design office, and currently we are only 4 people working at the design section, and then we're setting up the building office, like a construction company. So essentially we're setting up Biotope construction as a company and Biotope design as a company. And so essentially we're now starting to build the projects ourselves as well. So we have a team of carpenters and we have a team of designers, and those are split into 2 companies, but they're both kind of Biotope, Biotope designed and Biotope branded, if you will. And we're actually moving our office as well, the design office, to Denmark as a part of this ambition to go more Nordic about what we're doing, and also to bring our ideas into a wider international audience than what we would otherwise do from only Vardø. Yeah.
Okay, there is one more question from my colleague Maria. So Maria, please.
First of all, thank you for the very inspiring. And your story reminds me the story of the seagull, Jonathan Livingstone. Nobody believed him, but he did it in the end. But my question is connected with how you created the community for your architecture, and you created the tourism. Actually, the region is very attractive now. How do you keep it low in terms of, are there any developers who want to invest in the region and build huge hotels and restaurants and infrastructure, or do you keep it just like wildlife first?
Yeah. I mentioned briefly, we're just now designing a new hotel in Vardø, which is, the hotel itself is going to be, it's essentially going to have a whole series of features that are dedicated towards bird watching, and are featuring Hornøy as a bird cliff, and featuring a lot of qualities that match the audience we have been building for many years. And this is backed by investors from outside of Vardø. So yeah, we spent a lot of time kind of developing the tourism scene in Vardø, and now we're seeing the investor sides moving into Vardø as well. So it's but I mean, make no mistake, Vardø is still a place that struggles and has a declining population and still struggles with the rural community issues that you find in a lot of rural communities, but at least there's quite a lot of optimism and new opportunity and good things happening.
Is it your baby talking there?
It was. it means I need to go.
Okay, so I mean, we should leave you now because, or you should leave us because this was very imposing.
Yeah.
Calling for the daddy. So
Exactly.
I would like Tormod, thank you very much because this was really exciting and very inspiring for all of, I hope, young people who are looking for their way of life. So thank you very much. And
Yeah. Hey guys, if you want, feel.
Than the general career of an architect that you normally imagine after the school. And I would like to wish you all the best, but not only you, but actually when you are successful, then we all are successful somehow. So thank you very much for what you are doing, and let's
Yeah, thank you very much for all those the kind words. I'm very glad for this invitation and this opportunity to share our ideas and thinking. And I think, yeah, I mean,